Hello and welcome to another Pixel Maven project tutorial. This project features a combination of techniques inspired by the altenew Academy classes I took as a part of my Level 1 certification. There's a ton of different techniques to explore, so let's get started. I thought I would get the sentiment out of the way first, so I started by setting up my stamp positioner with a strip of Lawn Fawn vellum, which I covered totally generously with anti-static powder. Then I went ahead and set up my sentiment from Altenew's Superscript stamp set. And I decided to ink it in VersaFine Clair Nocturne because I knew I would get a really nice dark impression. And because it's a pigment ink, the embossing powder would stick really, really good to this. So I went ahead and popped it in some Ranger Superfine Black, and then it was off to the heat gun. With the heat embossing complete, I die cut the sentiment with the matching die. I decided not to use that little cutout for the center of the S as it really wasn't necessary for this particular project. To finish up this piece, I added the foam adhesive strips to the back, which took a while, but then once I was done, I just set it aside for later. Next, it was time to move on to the background panel, which is where all the detail happens. I started by making an outline of an A2 card on a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock measuring 5.5 by 8.5. This way, I knew where to align the different elements. Then I lined up my calligraphy maze stencil from altenew and applied my first color, Silver Lake, with my scrapbook.com stencil brushes. Always test out your brush before you add ink to your project to make sure the brush isn't too loaded. After I was happy with the first layer, I rotated the stencil 90 degrees and went to add the second stencil color, which was Cloudy Night. It's pretty easy to align this stencil because the spaces are the same width as the stencil itself. Once I had my second color in place and I thought that I was getting dark enough coverage, I went ahead and repeated this for a third time using a blue color. This is Desert Night, also by altenew. And I decided to shift the stencil so more of the blue would show through. This time I was really happy I checked the load on my brush because that blue was really vibrant and it didn't take much to get the color that I was looking for. Next, it was back to embossing. There are secret words in this design that are really only visible from close up, and these words are from the Reason to Smile stamp set. I had a really hard time photographing them, so you may not see them, but you see me putting them on the design right now using my stamp positioner. And I'm going to actually put the UR in place, and I brought in the sentiment because I wanted to make sure that I didn't overlap anywhere if at all possible. So I got those all in place and then I went ahead and used my anti-static bag. Don't forget this part because the stencil ink could be wet enough to attract the embossing powder and then you would have a total mess on your hands. So once I had that done, I used my Versamark and made sure I got a good stamp impression. And then I coated this in some Ranger Superfine White and it was off to the heat gun again. With those secret words embossed in the background, it was time to add in the UR part of the sentiment. I found the area that I lined it up with earlier and I got it set up in my stamp positioner. I had a little bit of problems because the paper was slightly warped from the heat embossing, but I took that second chance to get it set up. So once I had it in place exactly where I wanted it, I added some more anti-static powder and used my VersaFine Clear Nocturne and Ranger Superfine Black to emboss it with. For the embossing paste layer, I created a stencil with the altenew halftone cover die. If you can clean it up, the cardstock stencil can be reused. I masked the UR part of the sentiment with a little post-it to keep it safe from these last few techniques. Then I lined up the stencil and spread the paste over the panel until I liked the look of it. I heated up the panel to speed up drying and then did a little cleanup of my tools. I needed a way to get these Nuvo gilding flakes stuck to my project, and I wanted it to look like spatter. Since I didn't have a spatter-shaped stamp, I decided to water down some Tombow multi-purpose adhesive with regular rubbing alcohol and flick it onto the design with an aqua painter, also filled with rubbing alcohol. It takes just a minute or two to dry to a tacky state, and you can just add as much or as little as you want. This step with the Nouveau gilding flakes is by far the messiest. This jar is packed as tight as can be with light as a feather metallic goodness. Don't have a fan or space heater blowing when you're using these or it will fly all over. Coffee filters are a good way to keep the flakes somewhat contained when you open the jar. The flakes need to be fluffed loose from each other. Large bundles of flakes don't really adhere well and they just become little metallic nuggets. So you can either place the flakes individually and rub off the excess, or you can take a pile of the flakes, loosen them up in the coffee filter, and then pick them up as a loose bundle and rub them around the design. When finished, I tap off the excess flakes and use a large soft brush to get all the excess completely removed. I usually do that step over a trash can. The leftover flakes can be saved or discarded. I took a few minutes to clean up the mess from the gilding flakes, and then it was time to finish the card assembly. I trimmed down the background panel to 3¾ inches by 5 inches and removed the sentiment mask. Then I adhered the panel to a solar white 110-pound card base with Tombow multi-purpose adhesive. I really like the Tombow adhesive as a little goes a long way and a bottle can last a long time. The popped up sentiment could get adhered without anything additional, but I decided to add some metallic thread swirls to the back of the sentiment before adhering it to the card. Of course, if you don't have metallic thread, another great choice would be to add a few enamel dots in a coordinating color, as if the background wasn't jam-packed enough. I used the lines from the maze stencil to help make sure that the sentiment was perfectly aligned. I also made sure that the end of the sentiment carried on past the vertical end of the background panel. This helps to break up all the hard lines in the design and draw the eye to the sentiment. I hope you enjoyed this project tutorial. It's the first time I've done a voiceover speed video, so please let me know how you liked it and if you'd like to see more projects done like this. Thanks for joining me today, and until we meet again, happy crafting.